break up the networking that is going on at the moment. I know we had a networking hour in the morning, and I think there's more networking going on now. But believe me, we will have an opportunity to make these connections and to deepen the connections as we go along. So thank you all for taking your seats, and now let's dig a little deeper. And so we're going to spend the next bit of time discussing very specifically the opportunities with 48C, the priority areas as outlined in round one. And then as we go along the day, we're going to have more opportunity to engage about how we can leverage multiple funding sources from the federal government, from the state governments, from regional commissions, to make sure that projects really have a full wrap when we think about project development. So now it's my great pleasure to bring my colleague, Kelly Visconti, to the stage to have a discussion specifically about 48C, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A, a little fireside chat opportunity. And so thank you again. Kelly?
Thanks, Brian. Thank you to Congressman Mooney, Senator Manchin, Senator Capito's staff for all your support in the work we're doing. Thanks to all the state representatives for being here, our federal partners, and for all of you for showing up and for the work you do every day to really try to drive the change we're seeking. A little bit about me. I think I'm the first person to speak who is not from West Virginia, so please do not hold that against me. I hail from the great Garden State of New Jersey. We are also an industrial center. If you've ever flown into Newark Airport, that's what most people think of when they think of New Jersey or the Jersey Shore. And I'll just say that Snooki is not from New Jersey. She's from New York. So just putting that out there. I just want to also, the senator, some really tough acts to follow, frankly, and the West Virginia women's basketball. I am sad I missed that game. I'm going to admit, I tried to pick up basketball again after like 2 decades of not playing. Oh my God, painful. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for the women and the men that are playing, and just, it was just, I'm really bummed I missed it, and it just seemed like a really fantastic game and so close. So hopefully we can highlight some other opportunities where there'll be more wins for West Virginia going forward and surrounding states. If you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, that's me. Never mind. Sorry. There's a clicker. I got it. I got it. I have no idea if that actually worked, but one way or another, it advanced. So what are we going to talk about? And you're going to have a little bit of time with me, so settle in. We are going to do Q&A, so it'll be more interactive as we go along. But just want to tell you a little bit about the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains, which is where I work. Tell you a little bit more about some relevant programs in addition to the 48C, and then we'll dive deeper into the 48C Qualifying Advanced Energy Project Credit. A little bit more of the tactical nuts and bolts and the implementation of that, and then time for Q&A. Hey, it worked. Okay. So just a little bit more about me. I have the pleasure of serving as the acting deputy director for one of 4 divisions in the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains. I've been at the Department of Energy and in the federal government space for about a decade, working all in manufacturing. Initially in more research and development, and then I supported the Department of Defense on 3D printing, additive manufacturing work that they were doing, and then came back to the Department of Energy and have had the opportunity to serve in this role for the last year. The Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains is a new office within the Department of Energy, stood up in the last 2 years to help implement the bipartisan infrastructure law, Inflation Reduction Act, as well as we have some funding for the Defense Production Act to support really the how of the energy transition. How are we going to build the factories that we need and make the materials, components, systems that are necessary for securing an ongoing energy future for our country, national defense, and creating economic opportunity along the way. So I really think of our purpose and mission as being that front line of capital deployment. And our vision is really to help address those supply chain vulnerabilities. And I think of our mission as threefold. One is making sure we have the ability to make the things we need to make the clean energy transition and continued secure energy for the future. The second is making sure we do that in the most responsible way possible. Advanced technologies, the example Brian gave earlier of using AI and automation to remove a very hazardous and dangerous worker condition, right? How we can take advantage of technologies like this to not only reduce impacts for workers, but improve profitability and reduce emissions and impact on the environment. And then the third piece is really important. Our office has a mandate to support workers and making sure we have the people who can support these facilities and that we're creating that real economic opportunity for people as a part of this transition. So this kind of talks about our core functions. What do we in the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains do? We invest in manufacturing either directly to companies or through programs through states or in partnership with the IRS for the implementation of the tax credit. We also have programs directly supporting workforce. I don't have a ton of information about that in here, but our Industrial Assessment Centers program has been expanded through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And really there's an opportunity on the street now to help with building out training programs at community colleges, union programs, apprenticeship programs, non-traditional not four-year universities. We have a core program that is focused on four-year universities. And they have a dual-hatted mission of helping train the workforce and then making sure that small, medium-sized manufacturers are benefiting from that activity. So I'm happy to share more if you catch me later or if you have questions during Q&A. The third piece we do is some analysis. We need to make sure we have a strong understanding of where those key critical gaps are in the supply chains, not just now, but for the future. So really building an enduring capability to help the country and move forward. We do not have enough money to fund every manufacturing plant that we might like to, and I also don't think that's the appropriate role of the government to do. What we're looking to do is catalyze and be a partner with the private sector to unleash and unlock the capital that's out there to help really make those solid, good bets in the right places to help move the market forward. So we really need to have a solid understanding in order to do that. This is just a little bit of a chart to help understand how our office fits in the broader DOE landscape of funding opportunities. So as I said, I've been at the department for about a decade, and historically research, applied basic research, applied research, pilot scale testing, certainly we've in the past worked on development and demonstration type activities, but the big press with the infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act is on that large scale, commercial scale, first of a kind demonstrations, which is what our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations does. And the program that was just announced, 33 projects focused around industrial manufacturing and improving that in the United States. Those projects were announced on Monday, and Brian was at that event yesterday. And looking at MESC in that in-between space where we provide primarily grants, but we also support the tax credit, which we're going to talk about in more detail. And then the Loan Programs Office, which is really debt financing. And MESC sort of fits right in that middle space between demonstration to debt financing and really helping with the scale out and production of the things we need. So just a little summary of what we've accomplished to date in the last 2 years. We've selected 71 projects across 38 states. And I don't know if I got a pointer, but if you, nope, that turned it up. Don't do that. There we go. You can see there's a really strong cluster of selections in the Appalachian region, reflecting the importance of energy communities in supporting this transition. But you can see they are national, and these are multiple programs in our workforce development selections, our battery material and processing. We have a state manufacturing program, and one of our state partners is here today, as well as some of our heat pump awards. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Advanced Energy Manufacturing Recycling Grants, which is sort of a sister program to the 48C tax credit, but for small and medium-sized manufacturers. So I'll chat more about that in a minute. And then what are the impacts? So these investments we've made so far, we're looking at catalyzing $7 billion of private sector investment to match the government funding, 8,000 jobs. 34% of the investments to date have been in energy communities. We're targeting over 500 students, and I think that number is actually larger. I think this might be a little out of date, annually to help fill the workforce needs across multiple different sectors and enabling the production of over 10 million EVs through the investments that we've made. And we have a lot of funding still out on the street in active solicitation or yet to come. Okay, so just a little bit more about a couple programs in detail, and then we'll really dive into 48C. So what relevant programs do we have and how can you benefit? This is the Advanced Energy Manufacturing and Recycling Grant Program we refer to as Bill 40209, because in the government we like acronyms and weird numbers because that's how we roll. And we have $750 million through the bipartisan infrastructure law to implement this program. We completed a first round of this last year. We selected 7 projects. These are all in coal communities. Small and medium-sized manufacturers, less than $100 million in revenue, 500 employees on the site, and there's some energy bill requirements as well. If you are not a small and medium-sized manufacturer, if you do not fit that requirement, I would encourage you to think about how this could support your supply chain. How is this a potential opportunity to help build out the secure and stable supply you need for the key components, materials, et cetera, in your own operations? So while not applicable for large companies, I think there's still a tremendous potential benefit. Our second round is open on the street. We have $425 million on the table for companies that are in coal communities, that are small businesses, and that are going to either produce clean energy products and materials or directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their manufacturing operations. Key dates. Concept papers. This is a short summary of what your project is and what you're trying to achieve are due by April 8th. There are some registration requirements. I very much encourage, if this is you, check it out, take a look at what you need to do. Do not wait until the last minute because government systems or systems in general can take a time. There are registration requirements, so very much encourage anybody that's interested to look at that. Full applications, which is kind of then the rest of the details, are due basically the end of June, June 24th. So the Boston Metal project that was referenced earlier came out of this first round of selections, and we are super excited to have, high temperature chromium materials as a key cornerstone to many different application areas, nuclear energy, defense areas, as well as wind and others. We need this material, and this would be a really huge win for the United States to have this production and to have it here in West Virginia. Happy to answer more questions as we go forward, but just want to make sure folks are aware it's not billions, so maybe the millions sometimes get lost, but it is a very unique opportunity, again, for small and mediums. And one smaller program I just want to touch on. This is the Extended Product System Rebate Program. That's really interesting language to basically say variable speed motors and control systems. If you have an existing operation and you've made some upgrades to your facility, this is really targeting our manufacturing community here, you can apply for a rebate up to $25,000 per year. And there's special math about how you get the rebate calculated, but you can basically get some money back for doing the good work of improving your operations and efficiency. Again, I mentioned we have several other programs around workforce development, the industrial assessment centers. We have a grant program that then once you've been through an assessment to see how your operations are working, you can get up to $300,000 to then implement those, and happy to share more about it. But we're going to switch to the main event. So 48C tax credit, and how do you apply and some more details around it. So the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains is working and partnering with the Internal Revenue Service in the implementation of this. So we are providing essentially the technical guidance and expertise to help the IRS make the determination of who should receive these tax credits. We are also partnering with the IWG as this event. So big shout out and thank you to the entire IWG team for hosting and putting this on, our university partners for physically hosting the space. This is like the most gorgeous conference room I've ever been in for any kind of meeting. It's really unique and special. So thanks for all of that. And you've heard multiple times about the importance of energy communities in all of this funding and how many different resources exist through the IWG to really help communities be able to access that funding. And the programs that I manage are really focused on small and medium companies. They're focused on non-traditional participants in the federal process, and we are very attentive and trying different ways to make that funding more accessible using alternative contracting mechanisms, shorter application processes, trying to be responsive to the needs of entities that are not necessarily typically applying for federal awards, which can be complex and complicated. Okay, so a really important piece of the 48C tax credit is the IRS notice. This is the rules of the road. These are exactly what the funding is for and what's allowable. So very much encourage everyone when considering this to read the actual notification. The first round notification is what I'm going to talk about here. I think I'd use this as a guidepost. In round 2 will be what it will be. And so you have to take a look at what's in it specifically, but I think there's some helpful markers and guidance and things you can see from the round 1 information that should help people prepare for round 2. Great. So the tax credit itself is for helping with actual infrastructure projects for manufacturing and industrial operations. There's $10 billion of the tax credit. Each project is eligible to receive up to 30% of the eligible tax investment for the program. It's 6% if you do not meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So this is a really important lever in driving to make sure people are getting paid appropriate wages and that we are training people to be able to work in these facilities that are being supported by the projects. Again, 40% of the funding of the 10 billion total will be allocated to energy communities. So a tremendous important highlight there. The 3 types of projects that are eligible under the tax credit: re-equipping, expanding, or establishing an industrial or manufacturing facility for the production or recycling of clean energy and energy efficiency technologies. There's a fairly long list of what is eligible property. But fundamentally, components, materials for clean energy systems, energy efficiency, batteries, the grid. There's a kind of long laundry list of stuff that qualifies under that bucket. The second type of project is focused around critical materials processing, refining, and recycling. There are 50 minerals listed on the USGS list, and DOE has a list of critical materials as well. And these are really to process, refine, or recycle those materials, which are essential for many different applications, clean energy and otherwise. And then the third category of projects that are eligible are to re-equip an existing industrial or manufacturing facility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions on site by at least 20%. So round 1, there was $4 billion put out in the first notice. IRS is working through the process and anticipates notifying applicants directly by the end of March. So this week. Round 2, there's $6 billion remaining. There will be another round at least, and anticipate that in the coming months. Okay, who are eligible entities for the tax credit? Manufacturers, recyclers, folks who are looking to make or recycle the eligible property that we talked about, or who are interested in reducing their emissions in their factories on site. Why is this so critical? The components that we've talked about, the materials that we're talked about, the ability to reduce emissions and drive cleaner production of raw materials and other systems in a global economy is essential. This is going to also be a critical piece of creating those high quality jobs and achieving the long-term success that we want to see as a nation. I think we've said this a few times throughout the day, but just to reinforce, of the 10 billion, at least 4 billion will go to energy communities. These are census tracts with coal mines that have closed since December 31st, 1999, or census tracts with coal power plants that have closed since December 31st, 2009, and census tracts immediately adjacent. There is a lot of details in the frequently asked questions around, like if there's a river and how does it count? And so take a look at those to help you figure out if your location or the location you're considering for a facility is eligible. And I think we have the call out box here for some key areas, and you can see the whole Appalachian region being very densely connected with locations to the points earlier. So how do you apply? There's really a two-stage process. Just like I talked about with the 40209 grants, we use a concept paper. This is a phase. This is, again, a chance for entities to submit their idea, give us a short capture of what you're trying to do, and you can get some feedback. So we use the words encourage and discourage. These are non-binding. You can get a discourage notification and still think that we're wrong and you have a great project and you're going to give us a full application. So a discourage notification is not a stop. It is simply an indication of level of interest or alignment with the overall goals that we're trying to achieve. So must submit a concept paper. So that's a really key important part. So you don't miss out on being able to do your full app. Concept papers are reviewed by DOE, and then the encourage or discourage comes at that point. The second phase is much more detailed information, about 35 pages, including some attachments and other financial data. And whether you're encouraged or discouraged, applicants submit by that deadline. And then again, those applications are reviewed through the Department of Energy process. And then the IRS makes the final determination and notification to the applicants. Once an entity has been selected, you have two sort of next key important dates and timelines to think about and keep in mind. The first one is certification. Basically, you have 2 years in which to provide certification. You're going to meet all of the requirements that you put out in your application. So if you said, I need a permit in order to build my factory, you show us that you've got the permit, right? So things like that. And then the second date that's really important is that the equipment, the project gets turned on, put in service within 2 years of that certification. So it's a 4-year window that we're talking about that you have to pay attention to in the actual execution of the project. And a really important piece, don't put it in service. It can't be in service before you've gotten the selection. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit, again, this is for round 1, so please pay attention to round 2, the specifics that are in that. But round 1, the technical review criteria. How are you being evaluated? How are your applications being evaluated? What are we looking for? What are the kind of key components of that? There's 4 main criteria, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about each one. And then I think it's really 2 levels. One is the project technically, is it a good idea? Do you have a good plan? Do you have the right team? Is it meritorious? That's a key piece of the puzzle. Is it addressing something that we think is a critical need and gap that's spelled out in the notice and the guidance? And then the second is location. Again, focusing on how we're balancing the portfolio of funding to support that 40% goal or requirement, excuse me, for the energy communities. I told you you're going to be hearing from me for a while, so, you know. So the first criterion is the commercial viability. I mean, this is your business plan. It's everything from the schedule. Are you going to be able to meet the certification and the overall 4-year timelines? How ready is your project? How well have you addressed risks? Do you understand what the risks are? Do you have a mitigation plan? And what kind of contingencies do you have in place? The third piece is really about the business. Can you make money? Is it going to be successful? We want to see these projects not just get going in 4 years and then shut down the day after that. We want to see that these businesses and these projects are going to be actually producing and making the goods we need for the long haul. So things like the certainty of the funding. So again, this is a tax credit. The funding has to come up front, and then you get the tax credit at the end when you place the equipment in service that year. So you have to have secure, stable funding to be able to make this work. How well have you locked in your suppliers? Who's going to buy your stuff? Do you have offtake agreements? Really, the overall, degree to which this is going to be profitable and sustainable. And then the last part is about the management plan and the management team and the overall health of the organization that's requesting the tax credit. So this is really the business side of the whole equation, and have you got that mapped out well? I know that's like super tiny font. There's no way you could read that, so no worries. I think we're going to have a version of these slides that folks will get. Yeah, I got a thumbs up on that. Okay, good. So appreciate you taking the pictures, but also you'll get a copy. And all of this is in the notice as well. The second criterion is around reducing the greenhouse gas impacts. And this is kind of two pieces. One is really what's the absolute impact, whether that's a direct on-site emissions reduction, or you're going to make something that when you put it into service, a lightweight vehicle and an EV are going to actually reduce emissions across the board. And the degree to which you're recycling, reusing materials, which also avoids emissions. The second piece is kind of around, to what degree are you really pushing the envelope? What's the improvement relative to the state of the art? How much bang for the buck, I think the senator said earlier, are we getting in terms of the environmental impact? And are we using the latest and greatest technology across the board? So really helping the US become leaders in the production of these things. The third criterion is thinking about the supply chains and domestic manufacturing. So what are you making and how critical is it to our nation to be able to produce that item? That's the first bullet around addressing supply chain vulnerabilities. Again, in the notice and in documentation from the department, we've done analysis to really point and highlight to these. And to what degree is your proposed project really going to help fill that gap? And then how much are you going to make? How much is needed, and how much of the capacity are you going to be able to fill with the project that you're proposing? That was like, what do you call that? Thank you, alliteration. Okay, and then the last two are, thinking about how much are we advancing the state of the art, again, in terms of using clean technology, that the recycled products that you're going to be making are going back into the clean energy economy, and we're really helping build out the overall goals toward a cleaner and secure future. And last, but very much not least, is the workforce and community engagement criterion. And I'd just say the overall thrust is about reducing risks to people and the environment and communities, increasing the benefits, right? And that's really that equation that we're trying to solve for. The first sub-bullet here is focused on creating jobs and local jobs. How are we actually supporting the surrounding area where the project's going to be put into place? The second one is making sure that you can have the workforce you need to operate the facility if it's a new build, or to retrain workers to be able to operate whatever changes you're making to your facility. And can you get those people in time in order to make that happen? The third bucket is thinking about, again, energy community transitions, whether it's directly located in an energy community or near one, and what are the overall benefits to energy communities? And the last bullet here is around local environmental impacts. So oftentimes when we're improving our operations, reducing our energy use, we also have the opportunity to reduce waste, to reduce air pollutants, water pollutants, and any other land contamination. Again, this idea of how do we use advanced technologies to create safer, better, healthier operations which impact the local community. Okay, this is just sort of recapping the definition of energy communities. Applicants really should be thinking about how to potentially repurpose existing infrastructure and assets. That's some of the advantages of the approach, and how we're going to maintain high quality jobs for new and incumbent workers. Thinking about collective bargaining agreements, how unions are engaged in the potentially engaged from dislocated fossil energy or manufacturing employment. So again, for round one, these were the priority areas, and I said it's a very broad list. This is a subset of the actual eligible equipment, but things focused around the electric grid, everything from transformers, the materials that go into those transformers, and other grid components. Electric heat pumps, whether air source or ground source heat pumps, and the components that go into them. The electric vehicle supply chain, everything from power electronics, magnets, and battery components, which are all essential. Nuclear energy, so the manufacturing of specialized components and equipment for nuclear power reactors or their fuels, for existing reactors or new reactor deployments. Solar energy, again, pretty much anything you need to make solar panels, from the glass to the ingots to the silicon itself. And then just to put a fine point on sustainable aviation fuels, this is about manufacturing the equipment for the low carbon aviation fuel products. And then wind energy, many components across the offshore wind supply chain, monopile grade steel, and then also recycling. So when we make these large composite blades, what are we going to do with them 30, 40 years from now? We have to be able to recycle them and reuse those materials. And there's a lot of work moving in that direction. And I know something about that because I actually worked on a program around this at my last job at DOE. So again, these are the round one priorities. I'm going to say it again. Pay attention to round two because you want to read what's in round two, but this helps give you at least an idea of the kinds of things that we're talking about in this program. And then the piece that's not on here is the other category around reducing greenhouse gas emissions by at least 20% on site. And that can be through a range of solutions. Could be carbon capture, could be efficiency projects, could be fuel switching. There's a laundry list of opportunities and ways that you can improve your operations and reduce emissions. Okay, we're getting to the end of my talk. And then we'll have time for questions. So the other thing I just want to point out is there's an opportunity if you are not an eligible entity, but you have some expertise or some unique perspective to bring to the table. We are looking for reviewers. So we use technical and other types of experts to help evaluate and give feedback and input to the department before we make our recommendations to the IRS. So we're looking for folks who have expertise in all of the technology areas we've talked about, as well as business folks who understand commercialization and business plans, supply chains, emissions impacts, and workforce and community engagement. So you can see the link there if you're interested in serving as a merit reviewer. I would just say generally, if you're applying, probably not a good idea to sign up as a reviewer. That's a little bit of a conflict of interest, and we very much try to avoid that at all costs when we're doing these sorts of processes. So looking for independent folks who can really help us get a good eye to make sure we're selecting the best projects we possibly can. All right, so this is the end of my official talk. One thing I just want to mention in the spirit of we can't do it alone in terms of funding, our office has put out a request for information. That's like a way that the government can actually get direct responses and input from a broad number of people around what we are calling the manufacturing capital connector. And we were looking for folks who provide funding from the private sector, a variety of different types, to give us input on how they think they could partner with us to help companies who are applying for 48C or other programs be successful. Because in the case of 48C, you have to cover the cost of the projects up front. In the rest of our grant programs, it's a 50-50 cost match for the most part in the world that we're talking about in MESC. So you have to have non-federal funding to go alongside the federal funding, and where is that capital going to come from? So we're looking to build out basically a database, a tool set. We're trying to figure out still how that works. but really trying to build that connection point between the government funding service, a catalyst to enable the private sector funding to unlock the massive change that we need to see happen. All right, so this is officially the end of my talk. Appreciate your time and very kind attention. And I'm going to invite Brian up, and I think Arthur, if you wanted to join us, Arthur Habenstock is our stakeholder engagement lead from the Office of Manufacturing Energy Supply Chains. And we're going to take questions, 48C and anything else about MESC.
Kelly, thank you so much. And the manufacturing capital connector, I'm going to do this a little bit like a fireside chat until we get some folks warmed up. The manufacturing capital connector, it's really an outgrowth of the identification that private capital for decades hasn't really flowed to disadvantaged communities, right? And so we want to make sure that we have lots of engagement. Even looking at round one, we've been very public that the concept papers that came into round one, there were $42 billion worth of concept papers that came in non-energy communities, and 11 billion that came in energy communities. And so just doing the math there, that's considerably less than the 40%. So we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to make the connections. Now the DOE has to stand at an arm's length. We can bring and educate the private sector, the private capital sector around the advantages of going to energy communities, the return on investment, the opportunities that exist in leveraging not only the 48C tax credits, the infrastructure investments, but also the opportunities that we're trying to put together in the IWG, where say the EPA is one of our agencies, and they have billions in brownfields redevelopment, which certainly we're low brownfields opportunities as well. And so we're going to take the private capital sector, educate them on the opportunities in energy communities, and then set up a way that the federal government's not involved, but private projects that potentially can go into those communities can make those connections to those now educated private capital investors. So are there any questions from the audience? And Amanda, and then, yeah, good.
I have two questions. One is it possible to credit stack with 48C and another tax credit such as 45Q if you're an industrial facility that's going to be reducing your greenhouse gas emissions? And the second question that I have is related to the industrial re-equipping. Is the tax credit 48C available for those who repurpose from producing one commodity to another as long as they meet the other criteria?
The first question, tax credit on tax credit is not allowable. I'm going to look to Brian to verify myself before I correct myself.
Yeah, so specifically in the 48C code, the tax credits are not allowable on the same qualified investment. That's a key part. 48B, 48E, 5Q that you asked about, and 45V, which is the hydrogen production tax credit. The key is, and this is not tax advice, you must consult your tax lawyers, and maybe we have a couple in the room today, but the non-tax advice is that it is about the qualified investment on which you are applying for the tax credit itself. So if you're doing a 48Q, if you're doing a 45Q, but the same facility has, some other components that you're investing in the clean energy manufacturing supply chain space, that's good. On 45Q specifically, if you're not familiar with 45Q, that's for carbon sequestration. The carbon sequestration, 48C, what we're talking about today, would be the manufacturing of the equipment that you might sell to somebody who is doing a project in which they're injecting. So there are various components of that.
For the 20% reduction, you could use carbon capture. So the 45, that part of it, the 45Q and 48C, you can't double stack for the carbon capture element. But to Brian's point, if you were doing multiple things to improve your emissions reduction on site, efficiency, fuel switching, those things could potentially be eligible at the same location, but they're two different parts.
You might also qualify for grants. You can have grants potentially, theoretically, with tax credits. You just can't have multiple tax credits that apply at the same time.
Sorry, second question. So I think it's going to very much depend on what's written in the round two guidance. But the 20% is for you have a facility and you're going to do something to it to reduce emissions as the primary objective. There are in the clean energy manufacturing recycling category, if the thing you're going to make going forward is a clean eligible product, it would sort of fit under that category as well. Look, these things are connected, right? What's the primary focus of the work, so you can appropriately kind of bucket it in those three categories.
Yes, and then again, the qualified investment is what it costs to retool to then repurpose an existing product line or something like that. And sorry, we had two in the back and then we'll come up to the front. Tara, did you have one? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tara McGee. I'm with Senator Capito's office in DC. I'm her tax and trade policy advisor. I just wanted to know how many applicants you got from West Virginia, both in non-energy communities and energy communities, and then how many letters of encouragement have gone out to those applicants.
So because this is a tax credit, there are limitations. It's really coming through IRS. There are limitations on the exact information that we're allowed to release. When the IRS gives the notifications to individual applicants by the end of this month, we will be able to share some information regarding state-by-state awards. I don't know if IRS will release state-by-state applications. And then the private sector, the private entity who may have applied is free to announce they were notified if they so choose. But the federal government cannot release that tax information unless that private sector entity opts to release that information themselves. And so with the tax credit being a tax credit, being protected tax information, there's a limit to what the federal government can share. Just the IRS can't typically share information about the taxes of individuals or corporations.
Okay, so we would probably just have to follow up with IRS.
Yes.
Just to get general numbers.
Yeah, and there will be a general release of information when IRS makes the notifications, and the Department of Energy is working closely with IRS on what can be in that information. There will be some state-by-state level data, but in limitations of aggregate as opposed to individual.
Okay, because I think we'd also be interested to know who wasn't able to qualify because of Davis-Bacon requirements as well. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a good reminder that we at the Department of Energy are really the front end of this. Yeah, that we take in the applications and make a recommendation, but it's ultimately the IRS that makes the decision. And IRS, of course, wants to be very, very careful with taxpayer information and not allow us to go out and trumpet that. Even those companies that we really want to celebrate, it's really up to the companies to decide whether we publicize that. And we would love for those companies that do receive awards to come talk with us and for us to share that great news together. We're looking forward to that, but it's really up to the companies themselves.
Here and then Kathy.
For the 20% reduction, is that only for projects that are approved, that are selected competitively? Or
Yeah.
within a project?
So it's a special category for, let's just say I operate a chemical plant and I want the production of chemicals in round one was not eligible property, but I own a chemical manufacturing plant and I have a certain amount of greenhouse gas emissions because of that operations. I can apply under that provision if I'm going to be able to do things to my plant to reduce the emissions by 20%. So yes, you have to be selected in order to get the tax credit. You can do the project to reduce your emissions, but the tax credit, yes, you have to go through the application process to get the tax credit.
So if a project is in a qualified community census tract and it's selected as competitively to be a project eligible, is the 20%, does that apply just to the direct reduction of CO2? Or is it 20% of the total, an additional 20% on the project?
So the 20% is not about the money that you get. That's like the impact you're going to have with it. So it is about the facility itself. So like within the fence line of your activity, you emit a certain amount and then you're going to reduce it by 20%. The tax credit is the 30% at the end when you finish
For the project, yeah.
You don't get additional bonus for reducing the 20%. It's a different category of work. So the 30% is across the board if you meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, right? So that 3 buckets of kinds of work and then 30% or 6% applies across all 3 of those buckets. Yeah, percentages get confusing.
And just a side note, as we're going to the next question, a question came up last week. We were in Colorado about the size of projects. And, I made a joke. I have a 7-year-old and I said, no project is too big. No project is too small. Paw Patrol on the roll. But no, laughing aside, we are really interested in small and medium enterprises as well as the home runs as well. And so this goes with let's hit some, let's make our free throws. Let's hit some base hits. We do want small and medium enterprise to also participate. And so we can say we've had projects from in the tens of thousands of dollars of ranges to the, hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of the tax credit applied for. And we do want to encourage small and medium enterprise. Kathy.
My question deals with environmental issues. NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. People are hearing about NEPA who haven't ever had to deal with it as they're looking at funding opportunities. Now, this is a tax credit. So explain a little bit about the difference between the two relative to whether or not this is a federal action that requires analyses under NEPA. And secondly, how does this program interface with environmental permitting and your timelines for implementation of the project you've asked about?
Kathy, as always, you ask a great question. I'm looking for help from my GC colleagues in terms of, if it's a qualified action, a federal action to trigger NEPA and what our plans are. Because at this point, we are the Department of Energy, as Kelly said, we're kind of the technical experts, giving the technical assistance to the IRS. And so it's almost a question for IRS at this stage.
I think we can go back and get clarification on whether NEPA applies for 48C. I just don't remember off the top of my head. I know we've talked about it and it is critical. But if anyone has better guidance from the MESC team, phone a friend. If you don't know, it's okay, but speak up.
Hey, good morning, Kurt Marsh, your friendly representative from the Office of General Counsel. Excuse me, we actually have a meeting on Wednesday to talk about that exactly with our environmental law experts within OGC. There's a couple factors that connect to whether it is a federal action for the purposes of a NEPA review. It looks like probably not, but there's a couple factors they want to dig into to make sure because there's been some guidance from IRS subsequent to 48C actually being.
So there's been a lot of acronyms flying around this morning, and I will confess that I once got a job and I was referred to as acronym boy, and I'm never going to live that down. But does anybody want an explanation of what NEPA is and what this question is all about? We all know what NEPA is. Okay,
No,
great. Just want to make sure. Okay, heads nodding. Okay, so if you want to take that, that's fine, or I can. It's the National Environmental Policy Act. It's been around for a very, very long time. Anytime the federal government makes a major decision, it has to consider various different alternatives and what their environmental impacts are. It does not require any particular choice. It just says you have to think about a couple different alternatives and make a smart decision, understanding what the analysis have been. And so the question, and it's a very good one, is since this is a tax credit versus a grant, does NEPA apply? Do you have to go through this analysis, which can sometimes take some time in order to qualify for the credit, or is it just like any other tax credit? And that's not something that's subject to NEPA. When we do issue a grant, that is a decision that the federal government generally has to apply NEPA to. So that's something that we look through different alternatives.
Public dollars and spending them towards something that is sustainable and that is credible in its business proposition. So, and this is relative to the environment, but it's the same question, I think. And so it's not a difficult thing. It's just an early on investment. And I asked the question because the tax credit could be expensive. If you need to provide the information the government needs to make its assessment of whether or not you pass NEPA. So when you're doing the monetary calculation, keep in mind the tax credit can have embedded in it an additional investment, which would be fine. It's just, you need to know that.
And then to your second question about just environmental permits in general, I mean, that has to be built into the timeline of the application, and that's a consideration of the schedule. Can you meet the schedule? And if a key gate is getting certain kinds of permits, can you do it can you certify you can do it in the 2 years and certify you can do it in the 2 years and then actually complete it and do it, the 4 years later?
Hi, I'm Jasper Ball from 5 Area Development District over in Eastern Kentucky. I'm actually back home today. I'm from Charleston, so I'm glad to be back. So from the perspective of what I do as water infrastructure planner, when I hear what you are talking about, I think of, our water treatment plants. They often implement variable frequency drives in their motors when they replace them. But I also think about other industries, which we often haven't built inroads in with yet. But I can only speak with what I know. So in asset management, when you're dealing with decision on when you want to replace your equipment of some kind, you're thinking about when did we buy it? How have we depreciated it, et cetera, et cetera. When is it a good time to replace this equipment to something more efficient that's going to be cost effective? And that's only the type of thing you can know with what you can apply these tax credits to, and when your equipment is ready to be replaced. And I think there is a big opportunity for the area development districts to kind of, and in West Virginia, we have regions, to kind of play a big key role in this and developing those relationships with local industry and potential industrial partners such as that. But maybe talk a little bit about ways we can go in and work together, build partnerships, identify equipment that within asset management is prime and ready for replacement, and potentially even within water infrastructure, shoring up our supply chains, because as you know, when we fund projects through grants and loans that are often supported by federal dollars, and we need to be able to lower the costs for the components to make sure those federal dollars stretch further, and at the same time develop our workforce to manufacture and support our water infrastructure and things of that nature. So I think just to wrap that up, I can kind of ramble a little bit. There's opportunity to combine funding sources, develop relationships with folks, and really that comes around to what we define our role as in working with industry. And I just wanted a little bit of guidance on that as somebody who's never really worked in public-private partnerships and things of that nature.
Thank you for that. And we're trying to roll out more, technical assistance. And there are some components here. I want to toss it to Kelly about the industrial assessment centers. I think there's a component here. I know our industrial assessment centers really support the small, medium enterprises, but how much do they support local governments that are now eligible for direct pay?
So water, wastewater treatment facilities are eligible under the industrial assessments program. So this is a program I referenced where we fundamentally train students to go out and do free audits. And part of that is operational improvements, energy efficiency improvements. And then they make a report and a series of recommendations about how that entity could improve what they're doing. And then, as I mentioned, there are now small grants that are relatively small or grants to help actually then put those into practice. And so that whole program is available. I think in terms of the tax credit or these other opportunities, it's about partnerships. And so this is where the community engagement is really important, because we want to see that they have a demand for the product they're going to make. So let's say we're going to fund a new variable speed drive motor company in the 48C tax credit. We want to know that there's demand for the products that they're going to put out, and that if it's happening and they're going to be installed locally, that there's workforce. Like, I think there's a component around that whole package of support, even if not directly applying for the tax credit. There is this whole piece around direct pay where non-tax paying entities can also benefit from the tax credit. I'm not, Brian's point, not a tax expert. I use H&R Block for mine. Thank God that exists, because let's just walk through the questions. But I think there are a couple different opportunities in that as well. So one is just, there's other types of work that we're doing that I think could be really beneficial. Two, engaging with companies and with local communities to try to build a coalition around a project is, I think, a way that you can support. And then three, I think there are some opportunities for non-tax paying entities, governments, tribes to actually put projects into the 48C tax credit pipeline.
Yeah, and more broadly, speaking about working directly with communities in Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky, we have a rapid response team out of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Make sure you either connect with USDA or IWG downstairs in the tables after lunch. We can make those direct connections. Our job is to help navigate the federal system. You know, we're having a lot of DOE, Department of Energy conversation here today, but between U.S. Department of Agriculture, there's a lot of other programs available. So please make sure you connect with us during office hours. And then just to finish the discussion on the direct pay, if there are a lot of organizations represented here who do not have a tax burden, either 501c3s or government organizations, that are direct pay means that if you do a qualified project under 48C, under the ITCs and PTCs, that's an investment tax credit, production tax credit for deployment of clean energy projects. So if you're a municipality and you do a solar project on your property, you can receive a direct pay benefit from those production or investment tax credits. If you're in an energy community, you get a 10% bonus on that as well. But that direct pay goes right to the entity as a payment from the IRS to those entities that do not have an existing tax burden. That's the direct pay option. And so with that, unless there's one more pressing question, we'll take this one last question, and then we'll break for lunch and reconvene.
Virginia Office of Energy. And this is probably a fitting final question, because it's sort of a general question for those of us who are in offices that will be supporting applicants who will be submitting 48C applications. And thinking about this first round of applications, you saw people who were working on these proposals. What did you see in terms of the most common challenges that applicants faced? What were the main pitfalls? What were the areas that tripped people up? Can you pick like the top 2 or 3 and speak to those, so that those of us who are acting in that support capacity, or people who would be preparing applications, can have a heads up about that and get ahead of it?
So there's actually a webinar that DOE put out that's recorded and available online that summarizes basically the strengths, what were the common strengths and what were the common weaknesses. I mean, I think if you look at each one of the criteria, you can kind of see the business case is really important. Making sure that these are facilities that are going to be profitable in the long term, and that the financing is secure and there, I think, is a really key component. The impact, being able to really justify your emissions reduction, if that's the kind of project that you're proposing, and showing the supply chain needs and the capacity. I think the timing is also a really critical piece. And then the community benefits part overall, frankly, this is something that I've been in like government space about a decade, and this is really new. in the way that we're implementing it. Every single project that comes out of the department has to have a community benefits plan. And to Brian's point, not just a piece of paper. We're looking for quantifiable goals and actions. And if you're copying and pasting from something on a website, we're gonna know, not because we're using ChatGPT, but you can just tell by reading them, people who have really thoughtfully engaged with communities and put together a tailored, specific plan, and folks who are, not doing that kind of work up front. So very much encourage people to be doing that work in advance and really engaging. And this is a great opportunity to meet some local community partners who can really help. And to Brian's point, a lot of Tiger Team Task Force.
The tax credit Tiger Team or
No, the
IWG
regional
oh,
team.
our rapid response team. Sorry.
Rapid response teams to help make those connections with local partners that can really help build those out. So, I think across the board, but I would very much encourage folks to check out that webinar because you'll get a little bit more details around it.
If I could just add, thank you, and thank you to everybody who is helping companies out there to work through the application process, get it into us so we can consider it. We know it's not easy. We're working really hard to make it easier. Hopefully round 2 will be slightly better than round 1 when that ultimately gets announced. But we want to make it easier to get that money out there to help communities. And if there are things that we can do better, please come and tell us. Thank you.
Thank you. And the one last note I want to make is Kelly mentioned the concept paper discourages non-binding. However, you cannot apply for the full application unless you submit a concept paper. And so when that guidance comes out, please, interested project, take the time to do the concept paper. And we'll be around. We need to break for lunch. I know I see that there's a lingering question in the back. We can take that at lunch and offline. So thank you all for your attention this morning. Please do stick around. We have office hours from MESC. We have Office of Clean Energy demonstrations, the IWG, USDA, and others. I think all and the Office of I think who else? We have Senator Manchin's office and some others. Really thank the West Virginia Division of Energy and the Economic Development Division as well. And do check out the Division of Energy's plan for a greenhouse gas reduction fund submitted to the EPA as well. Very, very interesting and pointing to the supply chains needed here. So thank you, Kelly and Arthur. And Senator Capito's office will also be available during those office hours. Well, we have a roundtable coming up after lunch, and thank you all for the great morning.